before you had any assets, you were just thinking about what you were going to do. And so we've seen the journey together. When I've certainly been watching it from the outside, I couldn't possibly suggest that I'd have worked as hard as these guys have done to put this together. Guys, there's some people mic'd up still. Just be careful if you just come off the stage, as we can hear you. So I think the opportunity now is just to catch up with Olivier, because a lot has happened. Perhaps let me start with asking you a sort of fairly open question, which is, there was a lot of skepticism, I guess, at the start when, it was announced you had $1 billion and you were going to spend it in Africa, and everyone said, well, that's great, but how on earth do you spend $1 billion in Africa? How much of that has actually been deployed in terms of actual round numbers?
Yeah, you are right, Nick. That was a key question, as there was a lot of skepticism with this tagline of 1 billion for Africa. And at that time, and I think we had the presentation from Trevor, always looking at the pipeline, the announcement, and the gap with the reality and what is actually delivered. And a lot of people were talking to me and saying, but you have a very limited number of hotel international branded to open every year in Africa, so it doesn't make sense with the 1 billion that you're announcing. And our answer was based on real study of the market and saying what matters is not what is actually delivered, but what is the market need and how we can address the market need. And we were saying that our target is to address 8 to 10% of the market need, which then seems to be more reasonable, and especially when you see that the number of platforms and what exists in the market is limited so far. And this is what happened, and all this was pre-COVID. What we learned from COVID is that, in fact, the number of hotel owners, for a number of different reasons, but looking for new cycle of reposition the hotel, looking for an exit, succession, change of strategy, is huge. And most of our transactions are off market when we sit with people, when there is a certain size and complexity about what is my alternative, what you can propose to me. And this is what is happening. This is how we have executed 10 transactions. This is how we have deployed a significant amount of capital that has been commented by David, and that's where we are, because we are very excited to see that the potential is even larger than what we originally had in mind.
So obviously your initial focus was perhaps in West Africa, but you've now sort of moved basically into East Africa. You've got Kenya, Rwanda, you've announced you've got South Africa. And the other thing that's notable is you've bought what might be termed as a luxury asset, perhaps the first in the portfolio with the Cape Grace in my home city. What's the plan for that asset?
Well, so pre-COVID, our original strategy was to focus on greenfield and develop mainly, 70% economy mid-scale hotel, and to build new infrastructure that are missing in Africa. In everything we do is what is missing, how we create an impact. What we realized during COVID, and with the support from DFIs, and we'll come back on the financing, this is a critical moment, and a number of hotel owners need some help and support, and there is a need of takeover of existing asset, reposition the asset, rehire the team, and this is 80% of what we did is the focusing on this asset, which means that we're probably more upscale, looking at assets that have 20, 30, 40 years of history. That was one of your questions yesterday, and to see how we can enter in a new life cycle for these properties. coming to Cape Grace. This is an amazing property, and the potential is great. So we are investor. We have the season. There is the cash flow, and after the season, we'll start the renovation and repositioning of the property. And I will be glad to invite you in 1 year time at the Cape Grace post renovation.
Well, I'm definitely taking that invitation up, and everyone here, just remember that was an open invitation to come to the Cape Grace for a couple of weeks holiday after it's reopened. Senegal, you've announced a property there, a resort. What's the background in terms of, because I see some, I guess some people might have expected you just to sort of stick to a core asset base, but you're clearly diversifying in terms of product and obviously brand, and sort of moving away from what might have been traditionally sort of Ibis, Novotel, that sort of core within Accor's Africa strategy. Are you sort of spreading your wings now a little bit?
This might look at evolution of our strategy. This is in fact well aligned to also one of the key learning from the pandemic, which is how we can diversify our risk and what about our source of revenues. And the key learning for us and the key objective is that less than, 50% maximum of our revenue will be driven by rooms. And we are focusing a lot on the MICE, on the F&B, on the co-working, where we have this master franchise with Vojo. So we are, and especially when we renovate the properties, we are putting a lot of effort on different source of revenue, looking at different type of clients, and ensuring that hotels are really the place to live in the city, and corresponding to the need for the local guest. Which means that then leisure was a natural evolution, and especially in a place where, in fact, on the Lamentin, you are not far from the airport, so you can see a development today of MICE business. So let's say that this will be probably 70% leisure, but you have already a solid basis of MICE, which is quite interesting. So, but this is for me a great example on how hotel can have the resilience. And during crisis, this hotel never went below 45% occupancy. Wow. On the yearly basis. Yeah. And they did it thanks to the local guests. And do you know what happened on the ADR? The ADR increased during that period with the local guests that were not able anymore to go to their favorite destination, and then sometimes were a little bit forced, but enjoy a good product and good quality that exists in their own country.
Yeah, well, I guess this has been one of the more remarkable learnings is the domestic market, and how resilient that's been and how important it is going forward now. So it's interesting just listening to David earlier on. He was saying you're in sort of phase 2 in terms of, where you are in the evolution of the portfolio, what you need to do, operational focus, that type of thing. I mean, what you're describing there in terms of, diversifying your segmentation requires real skill, right? Now, you've got an operator, obviously, but I also notice you've got quite a substantial team now in Johannesburg. How does that interaction with Accor work? Because you're obviously managing the operator now, which must be quite enjoyable for you. How do you find that interaction in terms of your team and theirs?
We are the investor, we have the propco, and we have then the usual relation with the operator, between the owner and the operator. And yeah, we can comment, and is it easy every day? Do we have discussion? And yes, sure, as everyone in the room. Then the point I would like to take, because at every conference we try to put some oil on the fire between owner and operator. I would like to say the obvious about where we are now in this property. which is, we can sit comfortably in a nice venue. This property is, for me, really amazing and a great example of what can be achieved where you have the investor with the financial resources, the expertise, the professionalism, they did a great work, working with the operator to deliver an amazing product and experience. And both of them can be very proud with the support of the local authorities, with a certain vision aligned to the plan and vision of development of Morocco, where at the end, the result is that you have something which can compete with any place in the world in terms of quality, in terms of guest experience, with, on the top of that, the Moroccan hospitality. So this is where the cooperation is delivering some good result. Behind the scene, I'm sure, I don't know the story here, I'm sure that they had some discussion. We have some discussion every day, but we are facing a number of challenges in Africa, and this is where there is a need to have the close cooperation, and we work as a platform, how we can create the system around us with the operator, but with a number of other players in terms of renovation, in terms of construction, in terms of operation, to have a number of privileged partners where we can work in an efficient manner. And that's really what is needed and how we can address the challenge. Because if this property is the top 1% of what exists in Africa, and Kasada, as a platform, we exist because we try to bridge the gap with the rest of the other 99% of how we can elevate, how we can access to the financing, and how we can then bring the level of quality, the ESG standard that people can expect to find, and there is no reason to have something different in Africa compared to the rest of the world.
Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry to say that actually our time's up. We had a very brief session and it was cut back, so apologies for that, because it would be wonderful to hear more from Olivier, but we're going to have to call it quits at that moment. So if you'd all extend your thanks. Olivier, merci.